All right, folks, we are live, and I'm going to do a quick AV check here. Dan, could you say something, please?
Something, please.
Yeah, your audio meter looks good. All right, so folks in the chat room, if you have a hard time seeing us or hearing us, please let us know. But otherwise, I think we should be good to go. So a
Yeah.
very good morning if you're joining us live here from both of us are in the United States. So North America, South America, good morning. Rest of the world, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for joining us. All right, so I see right away, Tail Learn Code. I know exactly who that is. That is our good friend Chad Green. So Chad, good to see you. Good to see you. Let's go over some quick intros here. My name is Sam Basu. I am a developer advocate here at Progress Software. I do a lot of mobile stuff, a lot of .NET stuff, but I'm super excited actually to have my good friend and just absolute awesome Dan Siegel with me here today. So Dan, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, I mean, you already said my name, but in any case, I am a consultant. I've been around the Xamarin space for, good God, now 5-6 years, something like that. Yeah, it's at least 6 years now. God, time flies. Anyway, so I mean, I've been around literally since Xamarin Forms 1.0. I remember, I like was way back in the day. James White, who actually just left the App Center team and Microsoft, he was actually a sales rep for Xamarin at the time, and he was like, "Hey, I know you're really looking for something where you don't have to do the UI multiple times, so we got something coming up." And so like I've been around since like those days, and so it's been a fun journey, and it's like as I think back to the code that we used to write, because it was just there was no process to build these apps back then like you have now. You didn't have 10 different MVVM frameworks to choose from, and so it's been a real journey in trying to develop apps that are testable or maintainable, because a lot of times they aren't either one of those things. And I have to pick on a very good friend of mine, so Mr. Pierce Bogan, if you know him.
Yes, I do very well.
Well, I know you do, but Pierce, he heads up a lot of the tooling that we enjoy in Visual Studio Mac. So he kind of collaborates on a lot of that stuff. But back in his early days, when I think he was still interning at the time, he did this Moments app, and it was a Snapchat-like app. And I mean, this was 5 years ago. But I love to pick on him because it's an awful code base, and he'll tell you the same thing. And last year I actually started doing a stream where we were kind of like trying to update this a little bit, and he was like, "Oh God, why did you do that? Like, this is absolutely terrible."
So before you get into the thick of things, so Dan is a fellow streamer. So Dan, if you are on the stream, just drop in your handle, please, so folks can tune in when you are live.
Sure.
And also, Dan is out of you're still in San Diego, right?
I am in San Diego. Okay. Yes.
I'm in Northwest Pennsylvania, so opposite sides of the country here, and it's super early in the morning. But Dan is like up from like 4 in the morning, I suppose. So it's he's a machine. So I'm super glad to have you join, even though it's early morning for you. But this is the time that works for us. And also, like, aside from all of the intros, all of the things that Dan said, he is just being super humble because he is one of the core maintainers of something a lot of XAML developers just absolutely love. And coming from like a WPF background into UWP, into Xamarin Forms, this is something you're going to hear a lot of folks, especially in the enterprise, use. And that's an MVVM design pattern. Then you have frameworks to help you out, and Prism is one of the most popular MVVM frameworks that's out there. And Dan, along with a few other folks, are the core maintainers. So thank you for what you do.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, Prism is something really special. I mean, people don't realize some of the types of software that it's actually involved in. But I mean, realistically, both in the United States here and even around the world, there are a lot of emergency services that are using applications that are built on Prism. So 911 wouldn't happen without the Prism. Even things like stock markets, which we all kind of dread looking at these days. Those have a lot of software written with Prism as well. So it's very, very well battle tested. It's very reliable. If you are waiting on a paramedic or a police officer, if you need something like that, you need something reliable. And so Prism is a great MVVM framework. I love it.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy that it's available for Xamarin.
Right. So let me maybe set the context a little bit as to why I want to have you over. Because again, not only do you maintain Prism, you have a very solid grasp on some core concepts of how to make things testable and how to have sanity in your code base. So I wanted to kind of start from the basics. So I've been doing software dev for like 20 years now, but we all use dependency injection. It's just something I have a hard time explaining sometimes, like all of the concepts. So maybe before you get into, I'm sure like you do stuff in Prism that's very relevant to this conversation, but like maybe set the stage, kind of explain to me exactly where to start and how do we get going.
So and that's why I wanted to kind of pick on Pierce's moment shop a little bit, because we all kind of use some form of, like, we all have dependencies, right? Like we write services and they have dependencies on other services. And this is a kind of a great example of something that I've seen a lot of people do. It's not just Pierce, even though I love to pick on him because he's a friend. But it's this concept of, okay, I'm going to have this singleton instance, and I'm just going to reference that, or maybe I use the Xamarin Forms dependency service, which spoiler alert. But if we kind of come down here, this was just updated yesterday. So Stefan has just announced in this issue that they plan on deprecating the dependency service. So you're going to want to start building apps with a little bit more reliable strategy, and that's kind of where dependency injection is going to help you. But this type of thing here, as I tried to kind of abstract this out, you notice there is no interface on this. There is no dependency injection. We're just kind of, okay, new account service, and the other kind of services are the same way. And then every time they need each other, they just access that static instance. Well, that's not really testable because everything you're doing is through a static, and you can't mock out the other service to just validate this one tiny piece, right? And that really is kind of like at the crux of the entire issue that you want to be aware of, that you want to be thinking about is, hey, if you're going to write code, write something that you can decouple from its dependencies, because we all have them, right? So decouple as much as you can. That way you can mock out what the other things do and just focus on testing this one piece. And that's going to help you to write more modular code. It's going to have, you're going to write more loosely coupled code that way. It's just better architecture all around. And that's kind of where, we can start jumping into an actual project and look at that.
So while you're getting started, just a quick thing, folks. I am playing a little bit of ambient music. If that bothers anyone in the chat room, please let me know, and I'll be happy to turn it off. And actually, the screen that you see, Dan's driving the whole thing today. So I'm just a dumb viewer, and I'm trying to learn. So, like, before you get into code, so here's kind of a basic question from me, and again, just to kind of get started. So why should you use this in the first place? So obviously, we understand that whenever you have dependencies, you have probably a client and then a service that you depend on, another set of objects. You want to bring them in, but you don't want to have explicit declarations of what you're bringing in, right? So you want to have the freedom for the implementing things to do their own thing and be able to inject that functionality into whatever part of your app you're bringing it into. Is that accurate?
Correct, right? So, I mean, even let's take, I didn't get a chance to fully mock this out yet, but let's take kind of this localized, service that we have here. Maybe I want right now to use something that is based on a resource file.
Mm-hmm.
But down the road, I might want to use something that, hits an API, right? Like I might want to query Bing or Google or something. And so having a architecture that allows you to swap out that implementation very easily is going to let you upgrade your app. It's going to let you maintain this over time, and really kind of focus on these little tiny things much easier. The other thing is, what I see a lot of people do is, especially in the enterprise, you might have certain services that are abstracted the same. Like I might have a localized service that is the same across 10 different applications, but the implementation for each application could be different. So you can still write code against this interface, and because of dependency injection, we're going to be able to use it across all of our suite of applications, not just the one.
Okay, so yeah. Now, another question I keep hearing is, using interfaces, is that the same as using a dependency injection? Or do you need like a thing that actually knows how to register the services and then you just inject those in?
So this is kind of the funny thing, right? Is with dependency injection, not everything has to be based off of an interface.
Okay.
In Prism, we actually use kind of a variety of techniques. I think one of the ones that really confuses some people is that there are certain things like your view model actually never get registered with the container at all. And the reason for that is the containers just naturally understand that if you're a concrete type, right, you're a class, you're not abstract, you're not an interface. Like I can create a new instance of that. And so it's going to do that. And it's going to give you a brand new instance every time you ask for it. And that's just a natural state. For something like this localized service, for instance, I probably only want a singleton of it. And so I might take a slightly different technique. What I didn't get a chance to do, and we can do right now, I'm going to make it a little easy on myself.
Dan, would you mind, just bumping up your fonts just a little bit, the code part of it?
Sure. Give me one sec here. Gotta remember how to do that.
Yeah, just do like, you're on a Mac, right? So Command plus. Yeah, that'll do that too. Just a teeny bit.
Well, hopefully that works.
Yep, perfect.
Did that actually get bigger? It didn't look like it got bigger.
Yeah, a little bit. Try Command plus, that's kind of my shortcut, and Command minus.
Yeah, right on there. So it works on the main laptop, but not off my actual keyboard. That's weird.
There you go.
All right. So in any case, what I'm going to do is we're actually going to. Why am I not? Is that actually doing that? I'm so used to working in Visual Studio instead of Visual Studio Math. We're just going to create a interface real quick. Public interface, localize, and then we'll say string get hello. Which obviously this would be a terrible interface, but it's a demo. So,
yeah.
So what we're going to do, I brought in the Prism Dry IOC container extension. Now, the thing about that package is it actually does not have any, other than a reference to Prism core, it doesn't have any understanding of Xamarin Forms or WPF or anything else. It's just an implementation of the Prism IOC abstraction with the dry IOC container, if that makes sense.
Hopefully. Yeah. So again, so folks in the chat room, so IOC, what Dan is referring to is inversion of control, and dependency injection is a way of doing inversion of control where you give the control back to the implementing classes and what they can do without actually having the dependency drive what you can consume from the client. Is that accurate, Dan?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty accurate. I'm going to actually make my life a little easier. Container, registry, container. There we go. We're going to bring this in, and then I'm just going to say register types, and we'll say prism container extension is that current.
So we're doing Xamarin Forms here, folks. Did you say, I mean, Xamarin Forms did have support for a container, right? Or you said it's being taken away?
So you have the dependency service. So kind of as an example, so we have that localized, right? So if I said dependency, if I can type here, dependency service, so I can actually do a dot register. So we can come in here, we can say, I'm trying to remember, will it do both? Localize. I don't think it does both. I think you have to just give it the concrete. It's been so long since I've used it. I don't know, I guess they do take that. So you can map this out, and I can say, hey, whenever I ask for iLocalize, give me an instance of localize. Now this does have a limitation because the way that this works, if you are familiar with reflection, or the reflection APIs in C#, there is a class called activator. And what it's going to do is it's going to use the activator class to actually create a new instance of localize. But in doing that, it doesn't have any context around what it needs to do. So it's going to require a default constructor. So you can't have any parameters being passed into that constructor at all. Otherwise, it's going to fail. And so there are a lot of limitations with this. You also really have no control, like, or understanding. Is this a singleton instance? Is this a transient, right? Like, basically, am I getting the same instance every time, or am I getting, different instance? Like, what does that kind of look like? So it's not really the same thing. Whereas with this, if I come in here and I now say container, and we're going to say register singleton, right? And now I can do the same iLocalize and localize. So this is me just kind of telling the container how to map this out. And then I'm going to come over here, and what we're going to do in service A is we're actually going to say, I want to pass in the localized service. And then we're going to say public string get message, right? Well, I guess it would probably help if I made a property for that. All right, and then finally, we'll kind of get below. So this is kind of how we're passing this through. So my service A, it just wants to get a message. We don't know how it's going to get a message, but internally it's going to actually use the localized service to get that message, right? And so let me going to do iService A, just so that's mocked out. And now interface iService A. Weird. All right. So there we go. So now that's set up. And when I come over here, I can say container register singleton, I have service A and service A. So now the container understands everything it needs to contextually, right? I just give me an error here. to be able to see exactly what it is my services actually are.
Mm-hmm.
This is actual Prism services with Xamarin Forms application. So what we'll do, which usually execute, is I service inject this into example.
Then I got lawnmowers outside my window, so hopefully the microphone isn't picking up whole much. But I might mute myself if I need to. So I had a quick question before you get into main page XAML. So go back to your app start for a second. All right, Dan went pretty quiet in the chat room. No, I see your audio. No, hang on. I think there's something going on. Hang on 1 second. And all right, Dan, say something real quick.
Something real quick.
All right, chat room, let me know. Dan is a little muffled, but it should be back now because I think I did something while muting myself. So Dan's volume went down, but you should be good now.
Okay. Well, if I'm not good, I'm sure we'll probably see something in chat on that. Something real quick.
Yeah, that's
good.
Good.
Okay, good.
Okay, so back in your app start. Where you're registering these things. So you do some ASP.NET stuff as well, right, Dan? Okay,
I do,
so yes. ASP.NET, especially if you're doing like ASP.NET Core and all of the newer modern things, that has a completely different way of initializing. And again, it's a web app, but they use like a generic host, and they have builders. They have like a pipeline where you can bring in these dependencies, but we don't have that luxury in Xamarin Forms, right?
Yeah, not at the moment. I know people kind of have bolted that on. I know James Montemagno has done a blog post on kind of bolting on this generic app host model to Xamarin Forms. It is something you can do. It makes some sense. Like if you're just using Shiny and you're not using Prism or something, you already kind of have that service provider there. So, I mean, there are things that you can definitely do. And the dependency extensions from Microsoft are not terrible. They are somewhat limiting in some ways. So, like, they don't accept they don't accept what is it, the named services. That's kind of the big one, especially for Prism. So, I showed here like what we have is this register singleton. But like for Prism's navigation, for instance, what we would actually do is we would say register, and then we actually say object, and then we might say like main page, and we get the name main page. So what this allows us to do is register all of your pages in your application, and they get technically registered as an object, which maps to main page, but only if you resolve it using this main page key, right? And so that's kind of how we get around being able to overload all these different things and be able to map the correct type that we want for navigation. But what I'm going to do here, since we notice that now, like, hey, we have this error because we need to inject the service, is I'm going to say prism current, and then I'm going to say resolve main page. So you notice I never actually registered main page. and I didn't have to because I want a new instance every time I resolve it. And it's a concrete type, so it's going to just naturally understand how to go ahead and resolve this. And so now, if we were to run this app, what we should see, what we should see is that I can't type and therefore got a build error.
So before you run it, like show us your NuGet dependencies. Sure. What did you bring in from Prism?
So I didn't bring in Prism specifically. It's just this implementation of the dry IOC container for for the inversion and control abstraction layer that we have in Prism. So if I actually expand this out, let me kind of go down. So you see, I have there's like a generic wrapper I have around it, and then it's just prism.core. So there's nothing actually for Xamarin Forms. There's nothing for WPF or anything else. It's just this core dependency with the abstraction with the dry IOC implementation. So that's it. And then Essentials, which we're not really using, but it's part of the template now. This was actually, this is not a Prism template. This is just the Xamarin Forms based template out of the box, and then I updated dependencies because it's like you see.
Okay.
But we see here, okay, we have this hello from localizable resource, in the app now, and that's all because of dependency injection. So I didn't have to come in here and do anything really crazy. There's a little bit of wiring things up that we did, just to kind of map things out. But now I can replace this instance of iLocalize or the localize or of my iService A. I can swap things out. I can mock this out, so that way I can say, hey, if I give you a mock of iLocalize and that message says, hello world instead of hello from localized resource, did I get a different, message back, right? So it allows you to write code that, like I said, you can test a lot better and you can hone in on exactly what it is you're looking for.
Yeah, hopefully. Absolutely. So go back to your app start one more time, please.
Sure.
So in here, you were bringing in, where was it that you were bringing in service A? Okay. So iService A, that's your interface. So here, if you bring in another service that implements iService A, you would have to still specify in the registry, like that's my implementation of iService A, and then it will be swapped out.
Yeah. So like there are some things like for Prism, the way that we have this kind of configured out of the box is we're going to replace an instance. So if I say, let me just say I have public class service A alt. Kind of a terrible name, but that's okay. Right. So let's implement this. And then we'll say return hello, Sam. Okay. And now I'm still going to have I'm not going to like change any of those. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say register singleton, iService A, service A alt. Okay. And so what this is actually going to do is it's going to replace the previous registration. So even though we've registered it twice, it's actually going to be that last one wins.
So it's last in. And this may be a super dumb question, but once you have something registered, could you, so the way to replace it is by registering something on top of it. Could you swap dynamically?
Yes. Could you swap dynamically? What do you mean? What would be the use case that you're trying to do that?
As a consumer of iService A, what if I wanted to, in this code, right now, the way you have it, service A alt is the one that you have winning. But what if I should not be knowing this as a client, but what if I actually wanted service A in this regard? Is there a way to get to it?
Well, there are a couple of different strategies that you could take. One of them would be to use those name services. So, like if I said, service A, and then, we'll say service.
Oh, I see. You could give it them names. I see.
Service A, right? So I could do that, and then I could resolve these by name.
No, I mean this is obviously like
usually
you're defeating the purpose of this, obviously, by having to explicitly know. But yeah, it's good that you can.
So I mean that would be something where, like, if you did this, now you want some sort of kind of factory, like you'd want to have like a service A provider that kind of lets you do that. There's some other ways that you could do this as well. So I'm not going to go really into it too deep because, well, it gets really confusing for people really quick. But basically, there are kind of some open generic concepts that you can get into if you really want to spend the time and dive into those types of things. So you could say like, hey, I want container.register I localize. I mean, this won't actually work, but like I could say, whatever, like I localize and then localize like that. So you're kind of creating like this delegate registration where now the container is kind of understanding that any open generic, it's going to just automatically use this, and then you can inject other things dynamically into it. So that kind of becomes fun where, you might have something like, say, public class foo, and who doesn't love the foo class, right? And then public foo I localize Sam, right? So now it's going to know, hey, I need the Sam, whatever this is, and then you kind of customize it that way. So that's kind of another way you can get like these customized things without mapping every possibility out.
Yeah. Well. So before you move on, just a quick note. If you're joining us, folks, here, we are learning dependency injection, just the basics of it from a Xamarin developer's standpoint, and Dan's got a lot of experience doing Prism. So he's just teaching us the basics of IOC and how to register our services with a container.
Yep. So, so I mean, it's kind of this simple. So we put this service A alt in here. So we'll go ahead and run this. And all right, get that back up. And so now you see, instead of getting the original message, we have "Hello Sam" here instead. And that's because of that last in kind of wins as far as what gets resolved there. So those are kind of some easier examples of dependency injection.
Is this stuff documented in Prism Core? Like if I'm starting to use this, where can I find more info?
Yeah, well, Prism does have some documentation on this in our doc site. So it's prismlibrary.com/docs. And you can definitely read up more on dependency injection there. And of course, there's tons and tons of content on the web in general, on Stack Overflow. I mean, but there's a lot all over the place for sure. There are some changes that we've kind of made here in Prism 8 that actually kind of adopted some of what I was doing in these container extensions. So you notice like there's this container extensions package in the center here. And so I added actually a few more methods, if I can get my IntelliSense back, which it doesn't look like I have anymore. Visual Studio, you're failing me.
It's just,
okay. Well, I have no IntelliSense.
Fighting you.
It is. It doesn't like me. Let me see if I can close it and reopen it.
For what it's worth, I'm actually pretty much entirely on VS for Mac these days. I only go to Visual Studio when I'm doing stuff that is Windows specific, like WPF or WinForm stuff. But otherwise, I'm like for like most things ASP.NET, Xamarin, I'm pretty much on a Mac.
Yeah. I kind of bounce between, to be honest. But I would say most of my development is probably in Visual Studio on Windows. But to make it easier today, I figure I'll use VS for Mac. But in any case, we have some other things here in, as far as overloads. You can check to see if a service is registered. So this is actually very useful for, hey, I need some service, and if it hasn't been registered already, go ahead and register this default that I might have. There's this register delegate from the container extensions in Prism 8, which is currently in preview. This has actually been added, but it's been added as just register. So it's just an overload to this other registry method here. And this delegate is actually kind of fun. So I can have, like, let's say I want private static, let's say I service A, right? And then create service A. And then we'll kind of, so we'll do that. And I'm just going to do it inline here. It's terrible. You should not do this in real life. Factory A. Let's say I service A. It wants the message, right? So I'm going to add a property here. Let's say public string message. And then the get message is just going to return that message. So let's say you needed something that was closer to this, where you have some sort of factory that needs to make it, you might even need, I'm going to pass in the container provider. Right. And so maybe I need to resolve something. So if I needed to resolve something, I could. So like let's say if I wanted to resolve by localize, maybe there's a specific resource I wanted out of that. I could do that here. But we're going to just return factory A. I'm going to set the message to hello from factory.
Okay, I got a dumb question before we move on. So the container registry that you're passing into register types, that's pretty easy to understand. The container provider essentially does reflection to give you what's registered?
So no, the container provider, and we've kind of split this out, and it's split out in a lot of places too. So kind of going back to that generic app post, maybe that would be good to look at for some people. But so if you're familiar with the generic app post that you see like in ASP.NET Core, you have this register, the iService collection.
Do you want to bring this up real quick in your browser, Dan? Just the startup code that ASP.NET uses. And I can look it up real quick.
So I'm just going to actually go to Shiny. Let's go take a look at the Shiny samples.
So I'm going to post in the chat room what I'm looking at.
So this is actually kind of a good sample here. Okay. So Shiny uses this kind of generic model, and then obviously ASP.NET Core uses this. So what you have is you have this configure services method here with an iService collection, and then you're adding different services here to that service collection. Now there are a lot of things that you see, Alan has use memory cache or use app center. That's kind of the convention that they have here. Is if there are extensions built on this for registration, it'll kind of be like this use some service, and then all of the things that you need to do kind of get done for you automatically, which is kind of good and bad because it means you don't know how these things are actually constructed. this all kind of gets handled for you here.
Yeah, and I feel like the ASP.NET, excuse me, I feel like the ASP.NET world kind of rolled in with this because it is a natural continuation to what the ASP.NET like pipeline, the middleware has always been. Like you just keep on adding services, you stick them in, and it's just automatically registered and ready for you to use. So I think this is a natural thing for ASP.NET devs.
Yep, definitely. So, we have this iService collection that's what actually gets, all of our registrations. What you don't actually see here, and, I think maybe it would help. I'm going to jump around. Hope you don't mind. We're going to go to the Shiny repo itself so you can see the ice startup. Shiny startup. Here we go. So if we actually look at the interface for the Shiny startup, you see there was this configure services. There's a create service provider, and then there's this configure app, and that's kind of that generic app model that we see. And so you have configure services, which has the service collection. That's where you use some service or add transient, a singleton. That's kind of where you do all of that. Kind of the next step in the process is this create service provider. And so that takes the service collection that you registered everything with, and then it creates a service provider that understands how to get those services based on the registrations that were made in the service collection. And it's able to handle, okay, I'm going to create a new instance of this service, or like, is this a transient? Is that a scoped service? Kind of how do I need to do that? And then that final step is the configure application. And that configure application takes the service provider that was created over here. So that's that generic app model that we see in ASP.NET Core a lot, and obviously here in Shiny. And now to kind of put this in context, so this is that same kind of iService collection stuff, right? So we're registering everything with the container registry. And then the iContainer provider is the same thing as like iService provider,
gotcha.
Right? It just has iService provider, by the way, is actually part of the language. So if I say system dot, it's going to be iService provider. So it's right there, just for fun here. What we'll see is there's kind of like this get service that we can do, and that's kind of it, right?
Yep.
There is nothing. It's one method, get service,
right?
and that's kind of what we get off of that. Whereas the container provider, if I do that, there is a resolve, but if we actually look at our resolve, there are a few extensions. I know it's kind of small, but we can see that, again, we can pass in the name with it. And then there's also an overload here where I can pass in a collection of, technically it's a tuple, but it's going to be this collection of a type with an instance, which is actually very useful, say with Xamarin Forms itself. Like if you were trying to resolve the renderer on Android, if you go and you look at that, the renderers on Android all require a context to be injected into the constructor. So you need to be able to pass that instance of the context in. You can't just create a new instance of it. And so that's kind of where you do that if that context wasn't registered already.
Right. And Dan, if it's bothering you, you can tone down your font size a little bit if it's wrapping for you. But we can see very well. Okay, so these are the basics, I suppose, right? So you have a registry, you register all of your stuff, and then you have the last in wins, and all of this makes your code more testable. You can mock things out. You can totally go unit test service A and its implementation without bothering this app. whatsoever.
Yep.
So like one other thing I want to talk about is like for Xamarin Forms developers in particular, like this project that you have. So we are dealing with a .NET Standard library, which is our shared project, and then we have platform-specific projects like iOS, Android, UWP, Tizen, whatever. And a very common pattern that I see is when you try to get to something that is native, folks will have an interface and try to bring that in. I mean, you implement that in your native libraries, and then you bring that into the .NET Standard library and use it generically. Would you call that dependency injection if you are registering that service type?
Definitely. So, I mean, it's in a different project, but I can show that off real quick. We actually do have a sample of that for Prism. Like, this is how I end up with like 5,000 browser windows every day. If we come over to the Prism samples, and there is it's actually the third one here, platform specific service.
Nice.
So this is exactly what you're talking about. And what was that service? Text to speech. Well, that probably looks familiar because I believe that I'm pretty sure we ripped this off from Xamarin Forms, to be perfectly honest, right? So we've probably seen this before, pass in the text, and we expect it to speak. This is in that .NET Core library. So we have the abstraction around it, but we don't know how to work with it because that's going to come from Android or iOS, whatever. And so if we come over here, we'll pick on Android. And so now we've got this text-to-speak Android right here, and this understands, the native library to use. Well, okay, to be fair, the Xamarin team has kind of helped us a little bit on that specific issue, and I was lazy and didn't want to maintain this over time because there were some changes that had to be made, so I updated the Xamarin Essentials. But the point still kind of remains, right? You have these native APIs that you want to use. And so to work with that, Prism has this concept of an iPlatform initializer that you can pass into your constructor. And the Prism application will look for that platform initializer if it exists, and then call this register types. So that way you can additionally register any platform specific types that you might need to do. So what we actually do here is we register this iText-to-speech in the platform initializer. And now, this is all because we have to do this in our Android application. We can't do this in our .NET Standard application. But because we've registered it here, we're able to now use this in our .NET Standard library, even though it wasn't registered in the application itself.
Right.
Hopes that.
Yeah, no, and I think Xamarin Essentials actually uses a pattern similar to this. They have implementing classes and they just bring it in. Yeah, so
they do something. They actually do something a little bit different. So Xamarin Essentials actually uses a technique called cross compilation. So if I were to come over here to this application, and this is what you probably have, the application that we're working on right now. If we look at the CS project, it's just going to say target framework and then .NET Standard 2.0, right? That's what we're working on. This is all we're doing. On the other hand, and this is something I really encourage people to do, by the way, is don't be afraid to go to GitHub and actually look at code.
Yeah. I was going to say not that any of this is a secret for Xamarin Essentials. It's all open source.
Exactly. Although I really do miss when it was called Caboodle. I thought that was a much funnier name. But if we look here at Xamarin Essentials, we'll actually see that this is a little bit different. And so instead of it saying target framework, it actually says target frameworks, plural. And now we have .NET Standard 1, .NET Standard 2, Xamarin iOS, Xamarin tvOS, Xamarin Watch, Mono Android 8, 8.1, et cetera, right? And then they have this condition here that if we're on Windows, go ahead and add UWP. And that's kind of a little trick to get around some issues with Visual Studio for Mac not really liking it and trying to build on command line. it kind of freaks out a little bit. But this is kind of how you do that. And so what happens is for each one of these frameworks that are listed here, so it's what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So you have basically 11 different DLLs that get generated when you compile this instead of one DLL, right? So when we go in and we look at the NuGet, which we could do, it's fun. There are all kinds of tools that you can install. I'm getting all this all for free. Right? So there's the NuGet Package Explorer that actually works sometimes. Sometimes it likes to go hide behind windows, which is very frustrating. Let's see if it comes back. Okay, there we go. So you can use this on Windows. I have parallels through that. But if we look at Xamarin Essentials, open this up. And so, here are all of our different frameworks, and each one of them has its own DLL in there, right? Versus just one standalone DLL. So this is actually going to have, this is an Android binary. If you were to try to reference this mono Android 10 DLL from your net standard project, it wouldn't work. It would recognize, hey, this was compiled for Android, not for net standard, right. And it would fail. So you're getting the reference dynamically. This is just one of the beauties of cross-compilation and NuGet. So when you're referencing Xamarin Essentials from your NuGet or from your net standard project, your core project, this is actually the DLL that you're referencing as you're writing all of your code. But when you compile, and you compile for iOS, now you're going to use this DLL, right? When you compile for Android, you're going to get, depending on which version of Android, you're going to get one of these over here, right? And that's just kind of how all of that works.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different. I mean, it's like NuGet's form of dependency injection, I guess you could say, is this cross-compilation concept, which is another really fun thing to kind of dive into from a library developer perspective.
Right. So going back to your project with the services and the factories and the registries that you set up, so that's something where we can start off from, and we can bring in Prism IOC like you did, and we can have our registered services. And I know we have gone back and forth a lot on this, like the Xamarin Forms team. I mean, they have resisted bringing in a pure Mvvm type template to start off with, but you do, and I mean, I respect that. I mean, maybe there's some pushback from folks who are just getting started. But what does Prism do in terms of getting this kind of pre-wired in any of your templates?
I mean, I'll be honest. I just kind of I don't even use the templates all that often, mainly because there are little differences I want to do. I'm probably going to start doing some new templates, and I think that's probably part of my problem. There are some new templates I want to build. I just haven't gotten to it. But most of my projects, honestly, I start a new Xamarin Forms project, and I bring in Prism. It's not that much work.
No, it's not.
So, I mean, just to kind of show you, I mean, we were working here, obviously, with just the straight Xamarin Forms kind of thing that we were doing. But if I wanted to, come in here and go manage that, and we'll say Prism Dry IOC Forms. We'll add this this package right here. And now that that's added, little trick I love to do, by the way, is if you have a XAML class, I actually don't even want to specify in my C# what the class is, because we're using XAML compilation anyway, because it's all defined over here. I don't need to. And God, that's awful. This is one thing I really, really hate about BS for Mac. Why did you put everything on one line?
Sorry, folks in the chat, you can hear my kiddo starting to get a little anxious for lunch, but again, yeah, it's the reality of the times we're living through. So sorry about that. No, the one thing, Dan, when you're typing, the last time I remember looking into this, like with Prism, the thing that you actually do well is instead of the application, you bring in a Prism application. And I don't think you do much with the container registry, but you do definitely want to do the navigation, which is important.
Yeah, definitely. So there are a few parts to this. So I'm going to change this around so that way it doesn't get totally upset at me. Protected override. It will, well, it's going to get mad anyway. I'm just going to build it so it kind of regenerates the code behind. So now I just want one more method here. And I'm going to move this up to the top. So basically, when I'm normally doing this, I don't really need the constructor here. So I'm going to get rid of all of that. And what we're going to do is we're going to say container register for navigation, main page. Okay. So now we've registered our main page for navigation. Behind the scenes does kind of what I was showing earlier. And then what I'll do is I'll say navigation service, navigate, and I'll say main page. If this is a production application, I might have like a constants file or something.
Right.
But for this, magic string is perfectly fine. And then I'm done, right? Like we haven't really changed anything. So we were already using kind of our dependency injection container. We registered our services that we wanted. And now we're just going to come in here and it works. We didn't have to do anything really crazy. All we did was we added something to tell it, hey, I have a page that I'm going to want to navigate to.
Yeah. No, and even that small change makes a difference because you are using a navigation service. It's not just a stack, so you don't have to explicitly say from one view model like go, or from one code behind like go to that particular page. You can have the service stick it in for you. All right.
Absolutely.
So then what else? Like I'm a Xamarin Forms developer, and maybe I have heard about dependency injection. I see it now working. What are some of your parting thoughts? What are some tips and tricks to keep in mind?
Well, I mean, we did talk about, obviously, it's a good thing to use interfaces. That way you can kind of easily swap things out, but don't over interface things. So I'm trying to think of a good example here. So let's go find a plugin. So let's actually say the camera plugin. Or Zen, here it is, the media one. So we'll take the media plugin. So this is something I know a lot of people are using.
We're not going to worry about a lot.
Yeah, we're not gonna go too crazy on this. But one of the things I see a lot of people do is, like, let's say plugin media, and then there's cross media current, right? And now Visual Studio wants to cut out my
doesn't like you.
My IntelliSense.
Yeah.
For crying out loud. Let's try this again. If I reload it, maybe Roswell will come back. No.
I got a gasp emoji for Visual Studio whenever it just freaks out.
Well, maybe if I try taking it out. Let's see here. Using plugin media and here, cross media current. But there we go. Okay. So, I mean, we see that we have some of these different things right here. But one of the things I see, like, a lot of people do is, like, so you have, say, take photo, right? So what I'll see people do is they'll come in and then they'll say public interface, camera or iCamera. and then they'll say like task take photo, right? And that's really not needed. Like now you're adding bloat that was never needed. And you could have just written an extension method. There are a lot of different things that you could do to kind of simplify things for you. But just use the interface that's already there. And they'll kind of but they'll map this out, like pretty much, whatever this is. And the truth is, like I could come in here, I could say register instance, and I think it's like iMedia or something like that. Let me look in the namespace. Abstractions. Yeah, iMedia. And then crossmedia.current. So, I mean, it's going to tell me I don't actually need that because, well, I don't. It understands it automatically. But yeah, all I have to do is just say register the instance of crossmedia.current. And now I can inject my iMedia everywhere. I didn't have to go and add this abstraction.
Right. Yep.
So just kind of be aware of like little things like that. I mean, those are things to do. There are bad things to do. Another thing that I've seen a lot of people do, which I think is a little ridiculous. So let's just say, so I'm going to add a view models namespace here. And we'll create a base view model. Right. And what I see people is they'll come in and they'll say, I want public interface, base services, right? And now they might say, I want the iNavigation service, right? And then I want the iPage dialog service from Prism, okay? Et cetera, right? It doesn't matter what it is. And then they have that concrete there. What I would actually say is drop the interface and just make it a class. Sealed class if you want to make it a sealed class. But all you need is this because this is just a wrapper. And this is actually, I think, a really good thing to do when you're doing a base view model, because what you've ensured that you've done with this here is you can change, because this is a base view model, you can change what services get added to this base services class automatically. You don't need to register it because it's a concrete type. And it's just kind of this collection point of all the services that you want to inject into your base view model. And now when you have like view model A, view model B, and maybe one view model has some other service or whatever, you don't have to go back over time and then change every single view model because you wanted to change out the services that you were using in your base view model. So this is just kind of another really nice trick that you can do with dependency injection here as well.
Yeah, I think I mean, I've actually caught myself doing a few things that you frowned upon. So it's always good to kind of understand these best practices, understand how things fit, and how you can keep your sanity and have things separated out for concern. So it's open to testability. Okay, so
done plenty of it. I mean, that's kind of how we all learn, is to make the mistakes and stumble through and realize, oh, wait a second, So.
Right. Yeah, I think I heard this first from Steve Smith out in Cleveland, and he coined this thing called pain-driven development. So when you start seeing pain, go ahead and refactor, go ahead and bring in patterns, go ahead and do things that are for the health of your overall code base. So. All right, Dan, anything else you want to show us? So we want to be a little conscious of the time, but any other thoughts?
Well, I think that's pretty good for today. Definitely we'll be talking a lot more about the Prism Magician that I'm working on right now, which is a really, really awesome thing that will be available to my GitHub sponsors only through a private NuGet feed that I've recently launched. And so that'll actually do a lot of code gen for you. So it kind of uses this mixture of IL weaving where it is needed. It will use code generation when it's possible, so it'll help you to write less code. So if like there are methods that you're not really using, but they're required by an interface that you've added, it'll kind of add them for you, so you don't have to. And so it's just like all these little things, like some of the tedious stuff that you do, it's just going to take care of for you. There's some Roslyn analyzers in it, so definitely hear me talk more and more about that over the coming months for sure.
Nice. And one more plug from me. I obviously am biased, but if you're building Xamarin apps, Xamarin Forms or Xamarin iOS or Android, don't reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of help in terms of the UI components that you want to put in your app. And I obviously work a lot with the Telerik suites. We put a lot of love and care into it, and we want to make sure that any UI that you're bringing in, it works with Mvvm frameworks. So I actually know folks who do Prism with Telerik UI for Xamarin. So again, it's nice and pluggable, everything that you bring in, and these are good patterns to have to make sure your code is set up right for the future. All right, so folks, if you need to, no, go on, sorry, Dan, what were you saying?
I said, and you can tell I'm not.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I love your shirt. All right, folks, so you can actually find Dan all over the internet, but I do have his, no, that way. I do have his Twitter handle down there if you need to get hold of him. And obviously you can see him talk about Prism and all types of patterns. So Dan, I want to thank you a lot for hopping over. You're super busy, but just taking the time out to kind of explain the basics to us. And I appreciate you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
All right, folks, that's it from us for this stream. As you know, here on Coded Live, we love you all. We do a whole bunch of streams throughout the week. I think just this week you saw building NPM packages, React development, Firebase dev. Thursdays I kind of keep it for Xamarin, and then Fridays we kind of do like a casual chat show. Tomorrow, again, I mean, this is actually very relevant. A lot of us are getting into streaming because of the times that we're living in, and it takes time and effort to kind of get in the hang of all the software, all the hardware, and all of the bits you need to know to get started. So that's something we are talking about tomorrow. So come and join us whenever your time permits. And like I said, we love you. We appreciate all of you. So that's it from us. Dan, any parting thoughts?
I don't have any parting thoughts. I was, other than maybe I really have to hide from the police so I don't get arrested for going fishing tomorrow.
Nice. Have fun. Hey, in the chat room, Crazy Toe, I think you are just joining while we are about to go have, well, I'm about to go have lunch in a while. I got to get lunch out for my kid, and I'm sure it's like mid-morning for Dan, but Dan is up like from 4 a.m. his time, so I'm sure he's getting hungry as well. All right, folks. Yeah.
I'll eat eventually.
All right, that's it from us, folks. Once again, thank you, and we'll see you on another stream at Coded Live. And thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.